Welcome. Thanks for being inside on such a beautiful winter day when we should all be outside. And thank you all for joining together today to celebrate the life of Lisa Kimball, a person who, in the words of her devoted husband John, would light up a room with fundamental goodness. Lisa was a multifaceted force of nature, a big-hearted genius with a mind that just didn't think just outside the box. She blew the box up. Yeah, right, what box? Now, several of Lisa's friends have graciously agreed to share some of their recollections and their thoughts and their feelings. And yes, this is a celebration, but it's also a recognition of loss. Someone who contributed greatly to this world, who enriched our lives, is no longer with us. Someone we admired, someone we loved. So this is also a time of mourning. And mourning is good. It's okay. Tears cleanse. But before we begin, let's just take a moment of silence, a moment to reflect, to center yourself, to pray if that's what you do, whatever suits you. And also take a moment, please, to turn off your devices, all right? Nothing is more important than us being here together in this space, in this time, now. Lisa's life was so rich and varied that no one person could satisfactorily communicate the breadth and depth of Lisa. Now, I've known Lisa for over 40 years, but there's so much more to her than what I know. We have several speakers today from varied backgrounds who will share a little of the Lisa that they know. Now, our first speaker is Barry Cerf. Barry spent quite a bit of time in the Kimball household. He knew Lisa and her family really well, so I'm sure he has some tales to tell us. Barry?
Greetings, everyone. I'm Barry Cerf, and among the other roles I've played in life, I'm Lisa's made-up brother. More about that in a minute. To state the obvious, I mean, this is a very sad day, but it also is, as has been stated already, it's an opportunity to celebrate the life of a truly remarkable and loving person. I personally have always admired Lisa's anecdotal style. So what I'm going to do is share with you some stories of what it was like to know Lisa as a kid, and basically to have the opportunity to grow up over the years with her and her terrific family. Back to the part about being her made-up brother, the way that all came to pass is my dad and Lisa's dad. You've seen photos of Penn here. They were best friends, and they made a pact early on that they were going to trade godfather duties for their respective offspring. As it happened, Lisa and I wound up being only children. And so as time went on, Lisa basically announced that she and I were going to be siblings. One of the all about Lisa pronouncements. So it was announced that I was going to be her brother. And since as I'm sure everyone here knows, Lisa was always the brains of the operation. I was happy to go along with the plan. And so beginning as young children and continuing on through our lives, I had the opportunity to window in and window out in Lisa's world, hanging out with her friends, and hanging out with her family. Lisa's family was incredible. Her father, my godfather, Penn Kimball, uniquely brilliant and accomplished person. He was a journalist, a teacher, and many other things. One of the most principled people I've ever known, sometimes principled to a fault. Her mother, Janet, also a journalist who eventually built a very successful career in real estate. And Penn and Janet actually met at Time magazine. Janet was a researcher, Penn was a writer. And in those days, Time magazine had a hard and fast rule that there should be absolutely fraternization between writers and researchers expressly forbidden. And Penn and Janet demonstrated their slavish adherence to authority by immediately starting to date, fall in love, and they got married. Growing up as Penn and Janet's daughter had a profound effect on Lisa, and the benefits really began to accrue at an early age. And I think this is best typified by the tale of the fishmonger. Though Lisa was born in Connecticut and later spent many of her formative years in Westport, there was this period early in life when she lived in New York City. I think may have been when Penn was working at Time magazine. And at one point, the family was living in Greenwich Village, and Janet, who had a journalist knack for meeting people, forming instant relationships with them, included the cast of local shopkeepers and other neighborhood regulars as part of her network of friends and confidants, all providing, these experiences all provided early insights, I think, to Lisa about the benefits of community and networking. And as the story goes, from time to time, Janet would ask Lisa to run an errand for her, including, oh, honey, could you please go to the fish market and, get some flounder for dinner. And so a very young Lisa, and, we're talking, preschool age, maybe she's like 4 or 5 years old, would head out solo to see her friend, the fishmonger. And Lisa would arrive. The fishmonger, of course, like everyone else in the neighborhood, knew Lisa, was delighted to help her with her transaction. And then, mission accomplished, Lisa would proudly navigate her way back to home, clutching the evening's meal. And this is the way it was with Janet and Penn. They had complete trust and faith in Lisa's judgment, always communicated this to her, and constantly encouraged her to spread her wings and try new things. Now later, when Lisa and her family moved to Westport, I would visit them from time to time, and even at a young age, I could tell how different and appealing her Westport world was compared to my chaotic New York City version. And Lisa's world was a serene world, as I recall, but it was also one where exploration and activities and family traditions were highly regarded. Speaking of traditions, Lisa and I shared some small ones, even though they seemed immensely important at the time as kids. And as one example, when I would visit, the Kimballs would pick me up at the train station, and then regardless of whatever the plan was for the weekend, it was essential and non-negotiable that we immediately go bowling. Why bowling? Who knows? But it was mandatory, and it was hilarious. And then following bowling and following many gutter balls later, Next stop was to go to the Big Top, which was Westport's iconic fast food restaurant. I can't really remember what the attraction of that was either. I can't remember what the menu was like, but it really didn't matter because we always got the same thing. They had a barbecued rib and chicken combo that came in a little red and white checkered paper basket. And so that was an important routine for us. Another tradition that I remember at Lisa's house involved cocktail parties. Now, Janet and Penn had many talents, and knowing how to throw a great party was high on the list. And as part of that tradition, all young children were banished, sort of. We would be shipped off to our rooms for an early bedtime, and we'd pretend to comply, and the adults, for their part, would pretend not to notice that we were belly crawling out of our rooms to the top of the stairs so that we could gawk at the goings-on with the adult world. I think these parties probably served as Lisa's early social science laboratory. It was fascinating to watch her parents and their friends display new and surprising sides to their personalities that were not always apparent during daylight hours. Someone would invariably start playing the piano, and others would join in singing song after song, completely from memory. I'm not sure anybody does that anymore. And most remarkable was when one of Penn's otherwise staid journalism colleagues would miraculously produce a trumpet from somewhere and start playing a whole repertoire of jazz solos. And if it was a special occasion, like New Year's Eve, we'd eventually get invited down to join the party. We know you're up there, it's okay to come down. And so we'd come down, we'd join the party, we'd host a couple of Shirley Temples and join in singing Auld Lang Syne. Now, one of the many reasons I loved to visit Lisa was I never knew quite what to expect by way of some new discovery or idea or friend that she was going to introduce me to. And since I didn't see her on a daily basis, to innocently ask her what's new would typically invite a torrent of news and updates. One time, I arrived for a visit, and Lisa excitedly came up to me, and she said, "Guess what?" And I, "What?" She goes, "I'm going to become a Unitarian." And right away, she could tell I didn't have a clue what she was talking about. So Lisa patiently and enthusiastically, first of all, started to teach me about Unitarianism. The most important thing is it's really neat. And then she would list out a whole series of benefits and attributes. I can't remember them. There might have been a couple about, and there's no connection to Rome or to long-dead English kings. Now, for sake of fair balance, I'm going to admit to you that we were not complete angels all the time, and confess to the famous sock puppet caper. It's hard to say. So imagine, the two of us, it's a rainy day, we're bored out of our minds, and I'd say to Lisa suddenly, "Sock puppets." And the gleam of mischief would appear in Lisa's eyes. I'm sure many of you know about the gleam of mischief. And at that point, we would locate some sock puppets. We would ambush Janet, and she hated sock puppets. She would start gagging. Etiology unknown, and we would chase her around the house, shrieking with laughter. Like I said, we weren't perfect. So in the mid-'60s, the Kimbells decided to start summering on Martha's Vineyard, and new family traditions and new networks of friends and acquaintances soon followed. As time progressed, one of the most important developments involved Lisa getting her driver's license. A new tradition quickly emerged involving no destination car rides. We would pile into some car from the Kimball motor pool and just aimlessly drive the meandering roads of Martha's Vineyard, occasionally stopping for refreshments, but mostly just cruising while listening to the Vineyard's sole FM station, WMVR. Lisa quickly dubbed the station the radio station that time forgot. An apt moniker in her view, since their playlist consisted of the Grateful Dead, James Taylor, and little else. Last fall, after Lisa died, I was reminiscing with one of my old grad school friends, Griff Coleman, about the time that he and I had visited Lisa on his first ever trip to Martha's Vineyard, and how, laughing how Lisa had taught this lifelong Californian the proper way to eat a lobster. And as our conversation was winding down, Griff said, "You know, Lisa, really one of the coolest people that I've ever met." And I remember thinking, join the club, Griff, join the club. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Barry, for sharing that with us. Hold a special place in your heart for Lisa's family, who've lost so much. We've heard a little bit about it from Barry. John and Julie and Laura Kimball, John's sisters Debbie and her husband Mark, and Lisa's cousins who are here today. Lisa's friends spanned generations, and we have a double bill coming up right now. Ann Sheffer is Lisa's oldest friend and closest friend. They've known each other since kindergarten. And Ann's daughter Emily, who is Lisa's goddaughter, and spent a year living with Lisa and John and traveled the world with them. Lisa's love and her influence knows absolutely no generational bounds. So coming up and give us a little talk.
Purple folder for Lisa. I guess the way to start is to paraphrase a popular book title from a few years ago. Everything I know about Lisa, I learned in kindergarten, where we met the very first day of school, almost 65 years ago. As Barry has mentioned, Lisa was very imaginative, but I just want him to know that he was not her first imaginary brother. She got up in show and tell, and she would talk about her brother whose name was Junior SQ. Maybe it was because I already had two brothers and she just, wanted to keep up. But I'll never forget how surprised Janet was when the teacher said at the conference, she loved how much Lisa talked about her brother. So because she was not only imaginative but very willful, she brought Barry into being as a brother. She was, one might say, decisive or headstrong, but one day in kindergarten, you'll see our picture in there. She's on the far right as you look at it. She had long braids. And one day she decided she didn't want to have long braids anymore, so she cut one off. Janet had to take care of the other one. And we all know how dramatic she could be. I spent many dinners at their house, and there was one famous one where she decided to slit her wrist because she was mad at her parents, but she grabbed a butter knife instead. But the main thing that we learned in kindergarten, as they say, is we learned to use our words. And boy, did Lisa use her words. She could talk to anyone. She had read everything and processed it and shared it. And of course, this was the beginnings of what she did the rest of her life. And she wrote plays that we produced for our parents, in which she made my brothers play a two-headed dragon once. She wrote brochures for our business, which was putting on birthday parties for kids. And she wrote me these amazing letters home from camp, all about how she got poison ivy, and there was a pillow fight, and she got bitten by a horse. But that could be that imagination thing again. We had a secret code, and I'll give you a hint. My name became ZMM, and hers was ORHZ, see if you can crack the code. But for years, that's how we signed our emails and presents to each other. So we were the best sort of sisters, or almost sisters, in that we didn't fight because we actually wanted someone to share things with. We wanted to commiserate when we had to sit and clean up our bedroom, so we used to take turns sitting with the other one. Our families were very different, and we were able to absorb both cultures. Janet was a working mother, which I now have a great deal more respect for than I did then. My mother was sort of a professional volunteer, and she was very organized, and she would go shopping once a week, and she would have all the ingredients for all the dinners. Janet, on the other hand, on the way home from her job showing people around town, would swing by Gristides and pick up something for dinner, and it was always wonderful. But what Lisa and I did was we'd call home to see what was for dinner in each house, and then we'd pick the one that we wanted. But what both parents, and especially both mothers, taught us was that it was always fine to bring home someone to dinner. There's always room for someone else in your lives. We sang in each other's church and temple choirs. I got to enjoy their enormous Christmas tree, and for years bought ornaments as it got to be 1 Christmas tree, 2 Christmas trees, 3 Christmas trees. We even used to put on a little mini Seder with a couple of other friends, and Lisa would bring palm fronds so that we could tread on them for Easter. But we filled a sort of niche in each other's families. Lisa had no siblings other than Barry, and I had no sisters. I just had those aforementioned younger brothers. And so we began this tradition of going on vacation with each other's families. Our parents thought, well, those two can amuse themselves, and they would often leave us in hotel rooms and stuff. But for many, many years, Lisa came on the 8-hour drives to Vermont when we went skiing and broke up the fights between my brothers, and I got to go to the vineyard every summer with her. But probably the best trip that we had was the summer after 9th grade, when we tagged along when Penn went to what we called his 400th reunion at Balliol College, Oxford, which had the Queen Mother and a tent and the whole thing. But you've seen some of the pictures there. We're the black and white ones. We're wearing raincoats and scarves on our heads in every single city that we went to. And Lisa used to joke that we actually didn't go, we just were in a photography studio where they pulled down the Eiffel Tower or the Tower of London or whatever. But then came high school, and we got caught up with a whole new bunch of friends. Kids came from all over town and from Weston, whence came Rob Carlson and his junior high school friend, my husband, Bill. Also, we met Josh and Tim and Lissy, who's going to speak in a little while about what happened during some of those tumultuous years. But then college. Lisa went to Sarah Lawrence, as you know, because even though she could have gone to Barnard for free, it would have meant going to school on the same block as her father's office, and she wasn't going to do that. I went to Smith, both, I think, women's colleges at the time, and I think that really sort of drummed into us the sort of feminism and democratic principles that we picked up in our families. Then Lisa got married, and I was her maid of honor. Then I got married, and she was mine. And then I moved to Seattle. So our visits were more irregular, sometimes in Westport, sometimes on the vineyard. Both our mothers died. We were left with wonderful, crotchety old fathers who both lived well into their 90s. But then something magic happened. In 1979, with Emily being 5 and my son Brian being 2, we moved to Washington, D.C. for a year because their father was a White House fellow. And we lived right down the street in Georgetown from Lisa and John. And so we started to do things again together. We went to the theater, we went to movie church, we went house hunting and found the house on Kanawha Street. I'm still not sure the ceilings are high enough. That was one of the criteria. And importantly, John let Emily play her first video game, which was Pong. And you'll see why that's important. But what happened that year is that Lisa became Aunt Lisa to Emily and Brian, and then later to Betty and Aaron, though we like to think of her as Auntie Mame. Lisa was one of the most significant figures in Emily's life, and she's going to talk about that in a minute. But it's also very meaningful to us that probably the last project that Lisa did, having cut out most of her professional work, was to interview Brian on a podcast about his book, which is about imagination. So it brings us full circle to what Lisa was in kindergarten: so imaginative, so mischievous, so decisive, so persistent. The last few times that I visited her, we started binge watching 3 seasons of Grace and Frankie on Netflix, which is this wonderful show about women as friends. And we watched 3 seasons of it. The 4th season is just beginning. And interestingly, Emily now works for Netflix. So, Lisa, we're going to watch the 4th season, and we will be thinking of you because that story will keep going.
I can't remember a time in my life when Lisa was not the biggest influence I had. She was my aunt, as well as my godmother, mentor, friend, and inspiration. By the time I was graduating high school, I wrote my college admission essay on her and how much she had influenced me, and that was just the beginning of many more years of influencing. Watching my mom and Lisa taught me so much about friendship, and I feel blessed that I have a best friend from kindergarten too. There's a picture of the 4 of us together who I've been able to continue adventures on in their model. Other relationships may come and go, may come and went, but Mom and Lisa were solid. Sometimes in their lives, as my mom was busy with us kids and Lisa was out revolutionizing online networking, it didn't seem to me that they had much in common. But then their paths would intersect again, and I could see how much of a team they continued to be and how they truly saw each other and were there for each other. As Mom said, Lisa introduced me to computers and computer networking, first by getting my mom an early account in the Meta network and supporting my interest in computers as I grew up, even taking me along on a life-changing trip to Japan when I was a sophomore in high school. I met some of the people who are here. Where I spoke on a panel about meeting friends online to a room full of Japanese businessmen, all with little antennas to hear us being simultaneously translated. She introduced me to things like virtual reality and other technologies in the early 90s, long before anyone else was talking about them. And as I wrote high school papers and things on these topics, she introduced me to leading experts like Howard Rheingold. She had friends everywhere and knew everybody. She showed me early on that it wasn't that the computers were cool, but how they could connect people together, which launched me into a career in online networking and technology as well. After my freshman year in college, I had a chance to spend a year in Washington and lived with Lisa and John. And who wouldn't fall in love with their house, where every available space that wasn't filled with the most amazing, colorful, crazy art from around the world was stacked with books, and where the most interesting people would come to dinner or to Halloween parties that we'd throw, where the request was to dress like a character in the book or the gestalt of a book. Living with them taught me so much about relationships and shaped most of my vision of how I wanted to live my life. Morning conversations over the newspaper and coffee, fun times in front of the TV watching silly shows, hamburger patties and peas for dinner over conversations of what we had done at work and what was going on in the world. Sunday mornings were spent at a film workshop where we saw yet to be widely released independent and foreign films, and then had a chance to listen to directors or experts in those fields. It was Sunday mornings, we called it Movie Church, and I continued my subscription for a while when I moved to California, and then Lisa and I would compare notes on what we got to see. Lisa introduced me to an amazing mix of pop culture. We got hooked on the Today Show, Today Throws a Wedding, and for many years she would email or text me her picks for the favorite dress or cake. When I got married, she wanted me to apply to be on it, but luckily we didn't do that. In addition to flagging the best foreign films for me, she never seemed to miss movies that involved ballroom dancing or ice skating. And of course, she tracked ice skating competitions and tours as well. We'd go see the Olympic athletes when they'd come. She always seemed to know all about the year's hottest competitors. I won't even mention American Idol and her fans there. And for years, my mom and Lisa and I would be in touch during the Miss America pageant to hash through all our favorite picks. We always rooted for the doomed hometown favorites of Miss Connecticut and Miss DC, who never had a chance against the Southern Belles. And we would dish on all the talent performances. We'd get extra points for ventriloquists and baton twirlers, and one remarkable young woman who walked barefoot on broken glass, which became the bar that we compared every other performance to. And Lisa introduced me to the magic of Cirque du Soleil. She used them as an example of how great teams work together fluidly. And in some scenes, you would be the star soaring above the crowd, and the next you'd be there as a spotter as your colleagues took center stage. And the first time she took a big group of us to see Cirque, they were in Falls Church or something here, she brought feather boas for all of us to wear to the show, because we had to dress appropriately. In addition to the trip to Japan, I had the opportunity to take many other trips with Lisa and with John. A wonderful trip with Lisa and John to small craft towns in Mexico where we could gather more of their amazing artwork, an open space conference in Australia, a telecom trapper rendezvous in Cody, Wyoming, where we sat around a campfire with a laptop listening to cowboy poetry about networking. It was on that trip that we discovered the crazy genre of humorous taxidermy, which led to many years of exchange jokes. People do really weird things with squirrels, and jackalope postcards. One summer we stayed in a castle in Ireland where we were surrounded by cows. We had many trips to France. We were always impressed by John's French and learned to have these tours of the rubble left over from the Romans there. One summer, Lisa and I drove across the US from Seattle to DC with her friend Hewitt from Zambia, who was living with them at the time. And we treated him to a crazy mix of roadside America, from the Mall of America to Niagara Falls, and all of these crazy things along the way. After grad school and moving to California, I had the opportunity to work remotely for Lisa for a couple years as part of Group Jazz. She structured the company like a movie production company. She was the producer, and she'd bring together the right crew for each project, depending on what was needed. I had the opportunity to work with some of the amazing people in the network that she built and nurtured, including Susan and Peter and Amy and many of you guys probably. I got to watch her in action, facilitating events in person and in line, building communities and managing these projects, and just bringing people together. And as everyone here knows, Lisa was the world's best networker. She always seemed to know everyone and just who to connect to make some unexpected magic. So I'm truly grateful to have been a small piece of that network and for all the people and ideas that she's introduced me to.
We could probably spend a couple hours talking about the epic Halloween parties that Lisa and John threw. But I think we should hear some music instead. So.
Hello? And I'm Rob Carlson. This is Suzanne Boucher. This is Josh Barrett. And we're here to sing a couple of songs, and for the obvious reason that they couldn't get out of Marburg. I think we go to second part. But we're glad to be here. And I certainly go back to high school with Lisa, and in fact, she was my girlfriend. We dated through high school and college, and then briefly lived together in Providence, where I wrote this song. This is a song about a bunch of paintings done by a folk artist named Edward Hicks. I'm sure you've seen them on and formal and smiling like the sun stopped. Time ceased to move, and the bulb and the lamp in the days on his head, and a man shouted, leading them alone. My friend, have you seen all light and the spaces of colors that the Quaker painters see that we see in a piece of a kingdom shines in the faces of people from more gentle minds than me. Find myself drift these days. Never spaces, ends and ways of the world that seems so crazy to me. Look away, back and forward from today. The visions of either fool's see. My friend, have you seen all the light and the spaces of colors that the Quaker painters see that we see in the piece of a kingdom shines in the faces of people from more gentle minds than me? Such a beautiful place, full of joy, full of grace. It was bathed in a saintly old light. To know and to know that such things can't be so. We could only believe that they might. Have you seen all the light and the spaces of colors that the Quaker painters see that we see in a piece of a kingdom that shines in the faces of people from more gentle times than me?
It was beautiful, thank you. Lisa had an incredible sense of whimsy and fun, and she used that sense to do good, and to do good creatively. She had a friend who suffered a setback and was out of town for a while, and Lisa had keys to her friend's apartment. So Lisa went and got a helium tank and a whole lot of balloons and went to her friend's apartment and filled it with balloons. But she didn't just fill the public spaces of the apartment with balloons. She hid balloons in little used drawers, in closets, under beds, so that her friend came back and was astonished, amazed, amused, and grateful to see all these balloons. And then a few months later, another balloon would pop up. And another month or two after that, there'd be another balloon, so that Lisa's goodness and whimsy just lasted forever and kept spreading and growing. And I think that's kind of what Lisa did. Malachi Duffy was Lisa's father's favorite journalism student, and Penn had a lot of students, so this guy's pretty special if he was his favorite. He was also a close friend of the family and a lover of the beach, and he's going to join us now to say a few words.
So as I was thinking about this today and thinking about Lisa, I realized that I actually met Lisa and became friends with her in an uncommon, almost backward sort of way. I entered her life through her father initially, who was my advisor at Columbia. And if you would have told me that we were going to have a very close relationship at the beginning, I would have told you that was impossible. Because the first night of school, I met Penn at a cocktail party. We went against each other with loggerheads right from the get-go. It ended very contentiously, but before he left, he turned to me and said, "I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, Mr. Duffy, in my reporting and writing class." And that was the beginning of that. So it did work out very well. And fast forward to the following summer where I went up to the vineyard, and Janet Kimball, Lisa's mother, picked me up at Oak Bluff's ferry terminal. And when we were driving to the cottage, she said, "There's something I have to warn you about." She said, "Our child Lisa's going to be there, our daughter, but she's with her boyfriend John, and they are living together, but they're not married, and Penn is not happy about this. And you are going to sense this during the time you were up here." And yes, I did sense it while I was up there. Coincidentally, just before I went up to the vineyard for this first visit, I'd been hired for my first job, which brought me here to Washington, D.C., and I ended up, also by coincidence, taking an apartment literally around the corner from John and Lisa in Georgetown. We were so close I could lie in bed and I could see the balcony at the end of their kitchen. So we saw a lot of each other, and this opened up a whole new world for me. I saw my first video game, Pong, absolutely mesmerized by it and thought this had to be the most sophisticated thing mankind would ever achieve. But it also opened up a world of color and style. And even then, before Lisa really got into her collecting of the wonderful Mexican art that we've all seen and loved, their apartment was filled with art, the likes of which I'd never quite seen before. And there was also color everywhere, and also a great sense of style to everything. I, at that point, was fairly conservative and would show up, wearing khakis, Brooks Brothers button-downs, and really had not quite fit into my life yet. And part of fitting into my life was coming out and making my first trip to Provincetown. And I was talking to Lisa about this, and she said, "I know exactly what you need for this trip." And she went into a closet and pulled out a duffel bag that was done in the colors of the rainbow. So I asked her where she'd gotten it. She said, "Take mine, you can get another one." And that was the beginning of my experience in enjoying color, as you may have noticed. And that, I feel that is one of the greatest legacies Lisa gave to me. She really freed me from the Brooks Brothers tyranny. This also extended to the way she and John entertained. I grew up in a house where most of the entertaining was done on a sort of business basis. You would have the boss over, families over. So it was all, nicely set tables, lovely china, Waterford crystal, blah, blah, blah. Go to John and Lisa's, and it was all unmatched. And it was a riot of great print tablecloths and all kinds of wonderful food. And in particular, I remember a set of bowls that were in a rainbow color, and they were made by the Heller Company. You may remember them. They were a big thing back in the 70s. Perfectly round, very strong, and just beautifully shaped. And in one night, she did Mexican food, and all the condiments were arrayed in these bowls. And after I'd gotten settled into my apartment, John and Lisa came over one night, and they gave me a set of these bowls and mugs and a cheese board from a company called the Design Store, which was over on M Street. Was it on M Street? No, Wisconsin Avenue. Wisconsin Avenue. That also opened up a whole world for me. And one night after I'd sort of gotten comfortable with using these things. They come over for dinner for another, they came over again for dinner. I think I made my specialty at that point, tuna casserole with chow mein noodles and pecans. Dreadful. And I very proudly offered them coffee after dinner, and they said yes. And what did I serve them? With great pride, Taster's Choice. And they drank it and then went home, and the next day Lisa called me and said, "You were living in Georgetown." And she said, "If you ever serve that again, the chic police are going to come to your door and you are going to be taken away. This is what you have to do. You have to get a coffee grinder, you have to buy coffee beans, and you have to buy a Melita filter system." Which I did. So I didn't get carted away by the chic police. Some of the other food things, food was a great common interest. And it was not always parties. They took me one night. They wouldn't tell me where we were going, and we were in the car, and we were going way out into northern Virginia. And we got to this place. It was the classic hellhole. But it was a little place called La Casita de Speedy Gonzalez. And it had the most delicious Mexican food you could imagine. And that actually became a favorite place to go. It wasn't all such innocent fun. There was another night, I really can't remember what we were doing, but I do remember we were in the car, we were sort of near the Capitol. Lisa was wearing a Bolivian Indian hat and a serape, and there was a lot of smoke in the car. And I just kept thinking, we're gonna get arrested. My poor parents, this is what it's come to. They let me go to live in Washington, and this is what happens. A big part of our experience together was up on the vineyard, of course. And I always look forward to my summer visits up there. And during the days, newspapers, crossword puzzles, what books have you read, what books are you going to read? Here's one I brought up I think you would enjoy. Here's one you might enjoy. We would go for lovely walks on the beach. But there was more to it than that. It was not all this very genteel, civilized, sort of high intellectual stuff. For example, at night, there was TV. We were not watching Masterpiece Theater. We were watching Project Runway as often as possible. And the other great pop thing Lisa introduced me to, which I never would have discovered on my own, although I should have, was Adam Lambert. And she started sending me all these audio files and pictures and links to articles. And of course, I loved Adam Lambert and still do. And at a certain point, I thought to myself, what do I really know about life? Thank God Lisa's there to keep me clued in. And we actually went to an Adam Lambert concert together a couple of years ago. Lisa was in a wheelchair, but we were there and we loved it, and at one point she stood up and we were just raging with joy. And I'm not sure I've ever quite seen her so happy. Lisa was a beautiful mansion of many rooms. She had some of the most complex analytical skills I've ever found in anybody. She also, as evidence here, had enormous emotional intelligence. And she had an unrivaled ability at synthesis, pulling things together. And I think you see that again in this room. We're all brought together by Lisa, and it's always been like a great cocktail party full of fascinating people. But very unselfishly, with all that intelligence and joy and humor, she was very generous in giving advice. And whenever I had problems at work, which was often, and other things, she would look at it in a different way. And I was thinking about that. I met her in a different way. What I meant to say was I met her parents first, then her, whereas so many cases, you meet someone and then you might get to like their parents, they might get to like you. Lisa always had a different way of looking at everything. So I would present her with a problem, and she would say, what if you did this? How about doing this? And she was always so supportive and so loving. and always so much fun. Even if it was a problem, it became something, a project that you would solve together and enjoy doing. When I think about her in my life, and I was thinking about this today, I thought about the fact that I'm the oldest of 6 children, and I was always the one to make the formula, take care of them, feed them, comfort them, change the diapers. And I always wondered what it would be like to have an older sibling. And I realized that Lisa was the older sibling I'd always yearned for. Thank you.
Lisa was a beautiful mansion of many rooms. What a great line. And it really describes her. I think we can all feel the influence that Lisa had and the joy. And most memorial services focus on the life before the illness, before the suffering, and before the decline. And that's as it should be. I'm glad that's what we've all been talking about. But we can't ignore the struggle that Lisa and her friends and her family faced. Lisa was an exemplar of strength, grace, and practical optimism through an exhausting and frightening illness. She had a collective network of helpers who, in addition to practical matters, kept her intellectually stimulated and amused right up to the end. Going to an Adam Lambert concert in her wheelchair. John and I brought her in a wheelchair upstairs to see a show at Fringe. And she went on an outing a week before she died. So she kept up with life right up until the end. But most, if not all of us, are thinking, you know, I could have done more. I could have called more often. I could have driven her to doctor's appointments more often. I could have made more food. I could have done this. I could have done that, whatever. And you know what? You're right. You didn't do enough. I didn't do enough. None of us did enough. None of us can do enough on our own. But as a community, as a network, and Lisa was all about networks, we did enough. Together, we did enough. Her devastating illness was made manageable by collective support. Lisa was about networks, groups, interactions, and she knew that it takes more than one person to solve a problem, to create a solution, to be effective, and to initiate change. We together took care of Lisa, and she knew it, and she appreciated it. So don't feel bad if you're feeling bad about that, okay? Now, we've seen Lisa maintain friendship through generations. Lissy Stevenson has been friends with Lisa since high school, and Lisa was grand godmother to Lissy's grandchildren. So come on up, Lissy.
Tickety-boo, and Lissy too. I'm Lisa, you're Lissy, keep it straight. Lisa imparted this message under her photo in my copy of the Staples High School class yearbook, 1966. We spent time together, enough time together, that people sometimes mixed up our names. Lisa, Lissy, Lissy, Lisa. My name is Melissa Stevenson, and John has kindly asked me, as a longtime friend and classmate of Lisa's, to share with you a bit about Lisa during our high school years. We attended Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut, grades 10, 11, and 12 from September of 1963 through our graduation in June of 1966. And it's been a challenge to separate the Lisa 54 years ago from the Lisa we all knew and loved and admired and respected throughout her life. And she certainly was a constant in mine. Just a lovely friend to whom I could turn without hesitation for anything, anytime. In 1963, I was new to Westport and new to high school. I was suffering from an undiagnosed case of adolescent existential angst until I met the witty, whimsical, creative, giggly, generous, brilliantly intelligent Janet Elizabeth Kimball, known to everyone as Lisa, wearer of jazzy color combinations and wacky hats. I don't actually remember the first time we met, but our paths crossed often in classes and after-school activities and at the Unitarian Church LRY youth group meetings on Sunday. In addition to being, as she called herself, an armchair Unitarian, meaning she didn't actually go to church, Lisa was an alto in the high school choir and glee club, a member of the Staples Players, and she was smart. Outside of school, she was a member of the Trespassers, a folk band including Josh Barrett, Rob Carlson, Lisa's boyfriend at the time, Chris Avery, my boyfriend at the time, and Beth Penn. Lisa sang and played the guitar in this group and generously taught me, a guitar-playing wannabe, how to hammer on. And when the Trespassers founder, Rob Carlson, disbanded the group and formed the Triumvirate, Lisa and I, as the girlfriends, hung out together, something she was good at. We hung out often after school. My family's home was conveniently located a few minutes walk from the high school, and it was always a good stopping place for a visit and an afternoon snack. We referred to our gatherings there as our cultural hours. And word got out, and especially before we were old enough to drive, there were often 7 or 10 kids stopping by after school on a regular basis, and several of you are still here today. As for driving, well, I will always remember sitting in the back seat of Lisa's mother's car, a large US-made station wagon, Lisa newly at the wheel, and Mrs. Kimball, Lisa's mother Janet, riding shotgun and directing loudly, "Keep it in the green, Lisa, keep it in the green," referring to the color of the speedometer indicator that would turn from green to red as Lisa, with somewhat wild abandon, drove us along suburban roads and Route 95. After that, Lisa and I sometimes remarked to each other when getting carried away about something grand, some good idea or something, "Keep it in the green, keep it in the green." Lisa's parents were wonderful to us all. They picked us up, they dropped us off, they had New Year's parties, they hosted dinners before proms, you can see it in the pictures. They let Lisa use their car, and they fed us and counseled us, Penn always in his own inimitable and slightly terrifying way. Lisa's maternal grandmother, Mrs. Bauer, lived with the Kimballs during this time period. So Lisa really grew up with as I call them, a gaggle of great grown-ups surrounding her. We ventured into New York City, taking the train in for the day and lunching at the Princeton Club on West 43rd Street, compliments of Lisa's father, who, as an alum, was a member, we'll assume in good standing. And on one of these jaunts, we were speculating as to where we might find ourselves if we could be magically transported into the future. Lisa said we'd probably find ourselves in a ladies' room somewhere, and we'd have no idea where we were and what fools we'd make of ourselves trying to find out. You know, she was always busy identifying and solving problems for others. She was a great believer in her mind in the fact that you can have it all. And if she didn't think you could, she'd be the first to help you figure out how to change that. She never stopped coming up with good ideas. Even with this 2014 reply to another dear high school friend and classmate, London radio personality Paul Gamboccini. Through no fault of his own, Paul found himself, after a ludicrous encounter with the Metropolitan Police, on hold with the Crown Prosecution Service, and was keeping a small group of us abreast of his predicament via email from his house arrest in London. "Damn," Lisa wrote. "Sorry to hear you are on hold again. Maybe alien abduction might be a good strategy." For Lisa, anything was possible. I'm just gonna have a little break here for the hot and rolls. A few summers before she became ill, while driving by Abel's Hill Cemetery on South Road in Chilmark on Martha's Vineyard, Lisa mentioned how comforting it was to be able to greet her mother's final resting place every time she drove by. I mentioned that a friend of mine had once said that my grave marker should read, "She baked cakes for no reason." And then, after a good laugh, I asked Lisa what she would want hers to say. And her reply, without skipping a beat, she had good ideas. And we drove on. So I'm glad Emily mentions movie church, Lisa's idea of regular Sunday morning worship, attending film screenings prior to their national release. I'm also glad that Malachi told us something about Lisa's utter infatuation with American singer-songwriter and stage actor Adam Lambert. And I hope someone will tell us about Lisa's time learning to play the sousaphone. So Lisa wrote in what I suspect was a personalized group email to us all in November of 2015. Thanksgiving is a great time to reflect on everything you're thankful for. So I want to take a moment and thank you for being such a good friend. It's made a big difference in what has been a difficult year. The silver lining has been discovering and appreciating how lucky I am to have a wonderful network of friends and colleagues. And as one of you posted since November 3rd on Lisa's Facebook page, these reminiscences hardly begin to fully convey the singular spirit and energy that Lisa brought to connecting and knowing people. And so she's done it again today, bringing her wonderful network of friends and colleagues for this reflective tribute to our cherished and remarkable friend.
I don't know about you, but I'm up for some more music. That's really, yeah. In 2014, Lisa took a trip to Cuba, and she was ill then, but she knew that she had to go. And she found an absolute profusion of artists and musicians. She also noticed that everyone, be they lawyer, doctor, sanitation worker, artist, actor, whatever, gets the same salary per month. So Lisa realized that Cuban mothers don't push their kids to be lawyers and doctors. And that's why there were so many artists and musicians in Cuba. And what a mind she had. John told me that Lisa had a system sense beyond anybody. So we're going to have a couple of speakers, and we have a bonus speaker in between Lisa's two work speakers, who are going to talk a little bit about Lisa's work. So first we have Denise Easton, who worked with Lisa at Plexus and collaborated with her on many of the amazingly interesting projects that she worked on with Lisa. Thanks.
I'm sharing your glass of water. I'll put more in. Yes, I have a purple folder too. Thank you, John, for asking me and Sharon and our other speaker to share a little bit about Lisa's professional life. Lisa was my mentor, my colleague, and really most importantly, my friend. And I really had the great privilege to share many parts of Lisa's world over the last 15 years. It's nearly impossible to isolate a part of Lisa, because Lisa was more than just the whole, she was the greater whole. And for those of you in the complexity world, you'll understand that. Over the past 12 hours, Lisa's network has shown itself to be even more remarkable as stories are being shared and our connections become deeper and stronger. And I'm so grateful to now put names and faces to the Lisa network together today. Thank you. But I'm reminded about a quote from the first section of the Martha's Vineyard Cookbook. Okay. A Kimball family favorite at the cottage, and yes, there is only one swordfish recipe that can ever be used. It's the only one I now make. Chowder, if built with due respect for both clock and calendar, improves with age. In many chowder recipes, one encounters the phrase, remove to back of stove, and there is a good deal of eloquence there. On the back of the stove is where much of the perfection comes in. I have been amazed by a number of non-work friends who've said, hey, can you explain what Lisa does? And there is no one simple answer. I've tried my best, I'm not sure. 3 glasses of wine last night, I think I may have gotten it. But there's no one way to make chowder either. The magic of Lisa was her deep knowing and sharing of how to let the perfection emerge through her life's work. And her life's work began way before she was in her first job. Lisa was the executive producer of an amazing professional life that influenced the thinking of many people, yes, and left lasting contributions across many fields around the world. She was an entrepreneur, an executive, a board leader, a spirited provocateur whose passion for having a meaningful impact in every endeavor and every project gained momentum over the span of her life. Lisa embodied what she preached, and I bet all of you could tell me what it was. The single most important part of any project, team, or organization was building and nurturing the connections between people, ideas, and actions. Period. I could stop. That was really the essence of who she was. But I like to think of Lisa's career as themes that continually intersected and finally merged together in the last 10 years, where we did a lot of work together. But in the early 80s, she was a partner at the Meta Systems Design Group. I've met some people here who were part of that network. Oh my God, so cool. Where she experimented with groundbreaking models for integrating technology and online work to create new levels of engagement. She was an innovator in the field of organizational development, OD, in large part because she was able to demonstrate and explain, yes, the theory and science of organizational change and performance by her steadfast belief, once again, that it began and it ended with people. I met Lisa through the OD network, where we began a collaboration that designed and produced online events. Yes, oh, please don't hate us forever. We did the very first webinars. Everybody does webinars now, with real audio and plugging things in. We did workshops and seminars, and then we continued together across many organizations to develop new practices and projects that really, in retrospect, were consistently innovative and ahead of the curve. During the most complex and challenging circumstances, Lisa could see way beyond what other people could see. And it was her talent as an inspirational leader that would bring out the best in the team so each person could and would exceed expectations. Thank you. And it brings me to a story. We were doing an online course on complexity. And she was recording audio, I was recording audio, we were putting it together with images and whatever. And then I would come back to her and say, Lisa, there were too many pauses, whatever. I made a few edits. And at one point she called me up. Hey, Denise, I know how much time you put into this, but I sound like a machine. She said, can you put the ums back in, please? But Lisa brought her genius for networking and creative collaboration to every organization. And we often joked about Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees of separation in Hollywood. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, you know something? It's not 6 degrees. I thought last night it might have been 4, but I'm saying it may be even 3 or 2 degrees in the worlds that she moved in. So we've got a new parlor game, guys. But the quintessential Lisa style was most evident when she planned conferences, and a lot of you I've met through those conferences. And these are places and things and experiences that people are still talking about to this day. She was the consummate conductor, orchestrating the perfect experience, knowing that like jazz, when you brought talented, interesting, diverse, and passionate players together, the outcome would be fresh and unique and powerful. A Lisa Kimball designed event combined it all. The expected, the unexpected, complexity, science, OD, technology, design, thinking, drama, music, neurology, dance, and of course pure energy and love of the people who were in that room. Even if she didn't know what they were going to do or say. How many of us here, this is a little question, are deeply connected to each other simply because we had the great fortune to know Lisa? And I probably could walk around this room and give everyone a hug, and it's because I know Lisa that you know me. If she had suggested joining her at an event or conference, it was foolish to say no. I never did, because she knew that she would want the people who were there to make connections and friendships. And indeed, my whole life at this point in time is because of all those connections and friendships. And I deeply miss the calls where Lisa would begin, hey Denise, this is Lisa, I have an idea that should be fun. Hey Denise, I still have my phone. She would share a little bit about the project, and all questions and hesitations would be addressed with a confident, I'm sure we can find the people who can figure that out. How many of you have heard that? Okay. I'm certain her philosophy of life was simply an enthusiastic yes. And when she suggested let's do it together, who could ever say no? That would be really foolish. When she started Group Jazz in 2000, she called herself an executive producer, and it really was the perfect place for her because, as Emily so beautifully said, she was able to sort of bring all these people and ideas and work and brilliance together. A colleague recently wrote on one of the many online postings, when I think of Lisa, I think of the John Muir quote she had printed on the back of her business card. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything in the universe. I still have her card and still feel hitched to her. I could share hours of comments that people have written. But my last story, we recently worked together on a project for a client in Singapore. It involved awful timelines. I mean, it was like, 12 o'clock at night and 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and very short amount of time to get and pull together a week-long virtual event for all the senior managers throughout 8 countries with language and culture issues. It was amazing. But Lisa was masterful at keeping everyone focused on what was critical for the participants and ultimately the company. The centerpiece of the event was a rollout of a new enterprise-wide initiative called PRIDE, standing for Purpose, Relationships, Innovation, and Excitement. Each day was dedicated to a corresponding letter, so we began on Monday with Purpose. When it came to the last day, the CEO threw out the content and activities designed for excitement. Because as he noted, what we really want our organization to embody is fun. Now, mind you, this company had no fun. So Lisa and I redesigned the day 5, and no one mentioned the missing E because that was also part of the culture of the company. And the next week, a package arrived from Lisa with a t-shirt that said, "We put the fun in pride." Across the back. Lisa put the fun in everything. Over the last year, she once again enticed me to do something, join her on a journey, and she called, "Hey, Denise," a year ago in January, "let's have a Plexus conference." I think we all thought it was going to be one of a multitude that were going to come up, and it will be so much fun. It will be so much fun. I, of course, said yes with a little bit of a hesitation, and as only Lisa could have orchestrated, she opened the door once again for me and several other people here today to carry on the work at Plexus. I will always miss her wisdom, her brilliance, her loving friendship, and her voice asking me to join her on a new adventure. But I'm going to end with something that Jane shared with me last night. It's the perfect advice from Lisa. Your life is a vacation, fit working. I love you, Lisa.
Lisa put the fun in everything. Yeah, I think you hit it right there. Lisa and I used to say that we went to Sarah Lawrence together, just 10 years apart. And it was true. And my high school biology teacher went there 20 years before I did, and my son 30 years after I did. But we all knew that we shared something because there was a shared ethos no matter where we went. And I think we're finding today, hearing from people who knew Lisa in all different aspects of life, that we all share the same Lisa. You know, she didn't distinguish between her work life and her family life and her friends. Life was life, and Lisa sure knew how to live life, right? Well, we have a special speaker now, Izumi Ezu, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, would like to say a few words.
This morning, I woke up a bit early, and And I sent my daughters to Lisa and John's home when they were in high school, junior, two of them, and went to Emily's. Emily came to my home. So Lisa is almost a professional friend, as many of you are. Let's see.
That was 1985, 33 years ago.
So much so that I decided to start my own
That's 89. The youngest among us. Background, on the blackboard, climber, Mike Greenlee. Yes, Jeff Shepard was there. Lisa helped organize networking forum in Sendai in Tokyo back in 1988. PwC and MDG helped us recruit more than 50 participants from outside Japan. Amy was there. Whenever I go to Washington, D.C., I used to stay at your house, and together with John, you gave us all the insights about what's going on in Washington politics. Introduced some of the key members of the White House. Very much helpful in the research we did last year. I was able to visit your house again. Lisa was a little bit ill, but we were able to talk with John about some of our past, but also about the future. So, thank you, Lisa. Rest in peace. Let's meet again later. Well, I really feel honored on behalf of all the electronic networking before the internet guys, and without her, imagine, it would have been much weird, awkward. Of course, internet alone is not a solution. It's the offline real world as we know. I put some of these already online on Facebook. There are so many people, Jessica and others, who wanted to come, but Jessica got flu, so she couldn't come. And some others asked me to do online, I couldn't, I didn't. This is a special place. I really feel honored, and thank to Lisa for letting me come in all the way, fly from Tokyo. Lisa ordered me to fly. And all of my family members also joined now, because John and Lisa came to my home way back and stayed for almost 2-3 weeks. And all of my family members remember. So with that, I really thank Lisa. You're great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. That was lovely. Sharon Benjamin is another business colleague and friend of Lisa's, and I think she's going to wrap things up pretty well for us.
Do you feel saturated? For many years, I've taught graduate students, and I always tell them when it's time to do their final projects that they should go early, because going late in the process is very difficult. And I wish I had remembered that. Lisa and I met by mistake. It was my mistake, and it was pretty serendipitous. I'd finished a midlife PhD and was looking to make a career transition when my stepson died. And it knocked the stuffing right out of me. I couldn't find my feet. I was doing a little bit of work for a company called Plexus, and somebody called and said, "Hey, Plexus is having an open house, do you want to go?" I was a little bit miffed that I hadn't been invited. I was in that kind of mood. But I said, "Sure, I'll go, you bet." So the appointed night arrived, and we pulled up not to an office building or a hotel, which I would have expected, but to a gray 4-square house in Cleveland Park. Something's off, right? So we walk into this home of swirling color that you just saw, and it's absolutely jammed with people having really zesty conversation. And I know I'm in the wrong place. These were not my people. So it took me a while, and I finally figured out that this was Plexus Institute, and it was fabulous. It was just what I'd been looking for. I asked who was hosting, and they pointed out Lisa. And I made my way over to her and said, well, I'm here under a false flag, but could I take you to lunch to thank you for letting me crash the party? And she said, sure, how about bread and chocolate on Thursday? It was one of Lisa's private clubs. We went to lunch and we had a wonderful conversation about work and ideas and Plexus. And finally she turned to me and said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm not actually doing much. She said, what's the matter with you? Like, well, I'm kind of an introvert, and I had this whole diagnosis, and Lisa, that was not her thing. She said, do you want to do something? I'm like, oh, yeah. She said, oh, this is going to be fun. And she looked at me down over her glasses and said, take notes. Okay, so I did. And Lisa proceeded to outline a plan to network me into 5 or 6 different professional organizations and informal networks with specific asks and tasks to volunteer for. It was a tour de force, I mean, it really was. And I knew good advice when I heard it. I started making calls that afternoon. Within weeks, my work life was turning around. Everywhere I went, people said, oh, Lisa sent you? Great, what do you need? No questions asked. Everybody returned my phone calls. Saying Lisa Kimball was like saying open sesame. Now I tell this story because over the last 16 or 17 years, I watched Lisa do this for dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of people. She networked like she breathed. Creating connections among people was Lisa's great meta gift. She did a lot of other things as products, but the real work was in creating connections and networks. And she always knew just who to connect as a 2Z to make a much more powerful 3Z. It was an astounding gift, and many, many of us in this room have benefited from it. You've heard, I mean, you just saw, Lisa had a global footprint, right? From Singapore to South Africa, in classrooms in some very, very poor communities, from the Yukon regional government to medical clinics in West Virginia, from banks in London to the US Army base in Kansas. Lisa'd been there, and she was doing really good, hard work. It was amazing. If Lisa said that somebody had twinkle quotient, you knew right away to pay a lot of attention because that person had something big to offer. And if she introduced you as an unindicted co-conspirator, you were a made man. All set. She introduced young teenage filmmakers from an African American community in Cincinnati who were disenfranchised and very angry. And she introduced us to so many different kinds of people from so many different places. It was astonishing. Lisa organized meetings or ones that you never turned down invitations to. In the months before she died, she helped resettle an immigrant family from the Middle East because Lisa's life work was about helping people get back on their feet to make a difference, to make the world a better place. Now, I know that lots of you don't work in our field, so let me just say that many of us choose to work as sole proprietors for all kinds of good reasons. But that puts extra pressure on finding partners that you can trust and with whom you can work. Finding partners like that is not easy. And Lisa had a knack for attracting multiple partnerships. And Emily and Denise both talked about Lisa's analogy of the movie production company. We all thought that she loved Cirque du Soleil so much because their productions were successors to Lisa's productions. Big tents, important stories, interesting characters in great costumes who were willing to rotate in and out of leadership roles in support of the narrative that was emerging. Lisa had a gimlet eye for the sweet spot in a change effort in an organization. And for those of you who don't do this work, bad consultants can waste a lot of time because they miss the moment. It passes. Lisa knew it, she could anticipate it, she intuited it, and often created the magic at just the right point. The French would say à point, right? And there was Lisa at a very high level of mastery and improv, evoking something important from the network, from the organization, and from the people in it. She intentionally designed for beauty, and not just in her home, but in her work. And I don't just mean, although her collateral was beautiful, what was even more beautiful were the questions that she asked, the visions that she helped people realize, and the sheer stunning elegance of serendipity in an organizational setting. We waste a lot of time, money, and effort trying to make things happen. Lisa knew how to let things happen. It was a great gift and an enormous grace. Just because it was a gift doesn't mean that it didn't take effort. And I think a lot of us got Adam Lambert recordings. It was always my theory that she loved those makeover shows and Project Runway and America's Got Talent and American Idol because they gave a peek behind the scenes at how much effort and sweat and imagination it took to create the magic that ultimately happened. In our world, we talk about people, consultants. Some of them are show horses. Some of them are workhorses. Lisa was a workhorse. And she looked good doing it once we got on stage. But I'll tell you what, there was a lot of work that went in before we got there. Now, weirdly, for me, coming from a more traditional background, Lisa never diagnosed problems. Consultants can make a lot of money diagnosing problems without actually ever solving anything. And I could give you some names of firms around town. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't want to get sued, right? Whether it was working on healthcare-acquired infections for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, or trying to improve primary and secondary education in America for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Lisa always started with the question, what's possible? Forget the diagnosis, don't waste time over there. It doesn't get you to a solution set. What is possible? And when she asked that, she would bring a toolkit of techniques to evoke from the people in the system their own brilliance, their own expertise, so that they ended up creating the solutions and the future, not some external expert that was going to leave on Tuesday. They owned it because they'd created it. Lisa was the midwife. She helped facilitate it. So Lisa was hyper curious. She was, as you've heard, a walking book club. The morning she died, we had scheduled at noon a book conversation about developmental evaluation. And a group of us had a quick conversation about, well, do we do this or should we cancel? And somebody said, we can't cancel, Lisa would kill us. Okay, that's right. So we went ahead and had the conversation and announced her passing at the end of the conversation. After it was over, the author of the book called and said, I can't believe you guys could manage to do that, and what a gift in Lisa's memory. Now, lest all this sound too sweet, you have heard that Lisa had an oppositional side to her. It showed up in her work too. She didn't make a lot of distinctions. If you wanted to trigger Lisa's impudence, try being just a little too pompous. You'd get a pretty big reaction pretty fast. And she liked nothing better than to skewer sacred cows. By the time I met her, she was no longer a Unitarian. Lisa and I were consulting for a healthcare client, and it was a big deal, and we were getting some fun results. The client had hired a young academic to come in and be the project manager on the inside for the project. And we met with her, and from the get-go, it was clear that the young woman thought we were completely and utterly wrong in every single thing we were doing, in every possible way. And she didn't like the way we were dressed either. So sometimes when Lisa and I worked together, I got to be the good cop and Lisa got to be the slightly more impatient person. But we were co-facilitating a large meeting in Philadelphia with a couple hundred people. And all day, one of us was running interference with this woman, trying to get her to calm down and stop making interruptions and trying to take the group off track and go back and do Six Sigma and all kinds of crazy stuff. And by dinner time, we'd both had a snootful, completely over this. So we go to dinner, and we end up talking with a researcher from CDC who'd come up to investigate our work. And you know, it was a high-stakes conversation. We were pretty interested and invested in it. And this young woman interrupted once too often with an objection. And Lisa threw me a look, and I thought, uh-oh, here we go. Lisa squared up, lifted her chin, and brooking no interruptions and no interference for about the next 40 minutes, laid down the theoretical underpinnings, the research base, the logic model, the proof of concept, the evidence, and the stories that supported the evidence in a narrative arc that showed that we were actually getting the results that we had designed for, and the results were coming in the most surprising ways. We'd made a flip in the system. As Lisa wound to a close and her words drifted to the tablecloth like autumn leaves, there was a little silence. And the guy from CDC said, well, Lisa, that's why we're here. That's how it works in the world of biology, too. Oh. Game, set, match to Dr. Kimball. Okay? It was fabulous. I don't even know how she was breathing, right? It was unbelievable. Okay, so that's a great story, and I will tell you that we got fired 5 months later. True. Because sometimes when you push systems and prejudices too far and too hard, the systems push back. They don't want to learn, or they can't. You can't do the work that we do in the world if you're not willing to take the risk of getting hurt. Lisa was courageous, risk-taking, indomitable, stubborn, and brilliant. And she leaves a yawning hole in our lives. Now, some of you know that Lisa disdained organized religion. And I'm asking her forbearance, and I'm almost finished. But I'd like to quote a German Lutheran theologian. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a staunch anti-Nazi who was executed by the Nazis for attempting to assassinate Hitler. In his letters and papers collected after his death, he wrote the following to his family just before Christmas, about 3 months before he was executed. And I quote, "There's nothing that can replace the absence. There is nothing that can replace the absence of someone dear to us, and one should not even attempt to do so. One must simply hold out and endure it. At first, this sounds very hard, but at the same time, it's also a great comfort. For to the extent the emptiness truly remains unfilled, one remains connected with the other. It is wrong to say that God fills the emptiness. God in no way fills it, but leaves it precisely unfilled, and thus helps us preserve, even in pain, the authentic relationship. One bears what was lovely in the past, not as a thorn, but as a precious gift deep within, a hidden treasure of which one can always be certain. As Denise and I were preparing for today, a small group of us tried to approach the task of talking about Lisa's work life the way Lisa would have approached the task, which meant that we convened some conversations and had one-offs, and we all collaborated with Google Docs and kinds of things. And I want to mention a couple of names because it's important, and I think Lisa would have, so your patience. Trish Silber, Nidra Weinstein, Prusha Bussell, June Holly, Matt Minahan, Keith McCandless, Henri Lipmanowitz, Michael Arena, Jeff Cohn, and of course John. Those aren't all the people, and many, many of you had both direct and indirect influences. But we did try to co-create this the way that Lisa would have. As a group, we're hoping that those of us gathered here take a page from Lisa's life and broaden our possibilities, find new courage to be authentic and vulnerable in service to bigger ideas, and be even bolder when acting. Lisa loved working and made no distinction between love, work, and serious play. She loved events such as Pop Tech and Plexus and Cirque du Soleil, where play, mastery, and work intersect. And this brings us to a close with the last stanza of Robert Frost's Two Tramps in Mud Time, and a sound that would be so familiar and I hope evokes Lisa. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my avocation and my vocation, as my two eyes make one in sight. Only where love and need are one, and the work is play for mortal stakes, is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sake.
Thank you. That was absolutely perfect. And it's not surprising that you went so quickly from "these are not my people" to "Lisa sent you," because people were Lisa's people. I said before that none of us alone did enough, and that's not exactly true. John Cooney, Lisa's husband, loved for 44 years. John did enough. John did more than enough. John's been always been one of the most gracious, gentle people I've been lucky enough to encounter. And throughout everything, he maintained an even keel. He was always supportive, was always there. And I cannot imagine John's loss. John told me how fortunate he was to live with someone so thoughtful and generous, never thinking about herself. Someone incredibly tolerant before it became fashionable. Someone who didn't have an ounce of discrimination, who simply wanted to know, were you honest? Were you fair? When I asked John how he was doing, he said, "I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, but all my memories are happy ones. I come home from work, I see an object in the house, and I'm taken back to that day in Mexico when we discovered it and the joy we found in making that discovery." You're doing it right, John. So, I ask all of you to keep a thought for John, to reach out to him when you can, to hold him in the light if that's the sort of thing you do. And we could stand up here all day sharing stories about Lisa, but I think she'd prefer it if we split up into smaller work groups, had a glass of wine, a nibble maybe, and chatted amongst ourselves. And when I was talking with John, I reminded him of a long ago Halloween party at their apartment, and a party that was illuminated not with electricity, but with dozens of votive candles. Now, he hadn't thought of that in years, and when I brought it brought up other memories for both of us. John told me then that Lisa's life was a mosaic, and everyone has a story, a shining moment of memory. And each story gives us a richer and deeper understanding of Lisa, a life well lived. And so, after a few words now from John, venture forth, have a drink, have a nibble, and share. Thank you.
On behalf of Lisa's family, I want to thank you all for coming today and sharing your love and support and friendship. She was an extraordinary woman. I had 44 years where she brought love and life and color and whimsy and energy and an enormous vision and an enormous ability to put people together, as you've heard. It was quite extraordinary being on the receiving end of that for an extended period of time. We traveled the world together. We discovered life together. And she was the ace up my sleeve. Every time I had a major brief, I turned to Lisa and found a way, without violating the privilege, to ask her where the moral high ground was. And Lisa had an absolute instinct for the moral high ground. It came from her parents, Janet and Penn, and ran through her, Unitarian or not. She always was looking out for the moral high ground, and that's an unappreciated aspect of her being, because she never let people see her thinking that way, but she had a killer instinct for it. So now the family wants to join you at the reception next door. If you come by, you will find yourself probably sitting in a buffet line waiting to get a glass of wine. The best way I could think that you could pay tribute to Lisa was to close with something that Lisa would do in her consulting, which is that she would give the people who were about to go into that reception 2 questions to ask themselves and to discuss with their colleagues what the answers were where they're waiting in line. So Lisa's 2 questions for today would be, what is the one thing in the world that gives you most hope now? And the second question, the point of application. So what is the first thing you're going to do to try to turn that hope into reality? I hope you'll think about that when you're standing in line with somebody you don't know and use that as the bridge. Thank you very much for coming.
Long ago there was a Quaker preacher, had a dream that every creature came and stood assembled at his side. And he painted the sight that had sweetened his night fully 100 times before he died. Bearded lion and a snake and a child, wide-eyed and formal and smiling like the sun had stopped and time had ceased to move. And the wolf and the lamb in the meat from his hand, and a man-child was leading them love. My friend, have you seen all the light and the spaces, the colors that the Quaker painter sees, that he sees, and feel a piece of a kingdom shines in the faces of people from more gentle times than these. I myself drift these days, endless maze of ends and ways, and the world just seems so crazy to me.